So, hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the text from the 7th of December, which was the Buarque Holanda text. This was the exam in, I think, 2018. It's very difficult indeed. So if you felt like despairing, I sympathize. So just before I share my screen, I quite often say when it's a really difficult text, just take it phrase by phrase. But when I was doing the model for this one, I felt that actually it wasn't bad advice, but it wasn't sufficient. I think with a text like this that has complicated sentences with lots of clauses, some of which are dependent, some of which are adverbial clauses, you have to read the whole sentence and get the feeling for it first. And you have to pause a little bit and think about the word order especially. So remember that if in doubt, the subject comes and then the verb and then the direct object. And if you've got a time expression, it probably will come right at the beginning or right at the end. If you've got an adverb of manner, it will probably come before, actually, sorry, it'll vary quite a lot. I am going to share a reminder about adverb word order, because, you know, we have things like manner, he ran quickly, she spoke slowly. And then we have adverbs of frequency, which usually come before the main verb. She often records class on Saturday. So she often records class on Saturday is quite a classic example. Often, frequency, comes directly before the main verb, records. On Saturday, time, right at the end. And if I was speaking in the present perfect, you could say, she has often recorded. So again, often stays before the main verb, not before has, because has is the auxiliary verb. She has often recorded on Saturday, has often recorded class on Saturday. Okay, so that's when you have a lot of things to fit into a sentence. You really do need to read the whole sentence first and just stop and think, can I stick to the Portuguese word order, or should I be a little bit freer here? And in many cases in this translation, we had to be a little bit freer. So I'm now going to share my screen and we'll go through the text. In the notes, I don't go into a lot of detail because there's just so much that could go wrong here, including vocabulary. But what I noticed in your work, the work that people sent and that I've had from other students that study with me at Sarah's course, people actually did surprisingly well. Even if you had to guess at what things meant, nearly everyone managed to find a word that gave the right idea, you know, not totally wrong. And in the very recently re-corrected CACD exam, I noticed that the new examiners tended to mark a lot of things wrong. And sometimes they mark things wrong when they should actually have just taken a mark off for fidelity, in my view. So let's say in the first paragraph here, you were translating nessa proeza, and you couldn't think of the word undertaking or feat, F-E-A-T, which are good words in English here. You might have thought of, I don't know, some other word like activity or accomplishment or achievement. I think I wouldn't have marked that wrong, but I might have subtracted a small something for fidelity. And the examiner shouldn't subtract for fidelity and for accuracy on the same word, but it's really hard to be sure what they're actually thinking and what they're subtracting for fidelity. Okay, so to look in a little more detail at the first paragraph. So the first thing I noticed here was that you have in Portuguese, da conquista, do trópico, and I would keep these of words. I wouldn't try to say the tropics conquest, the pioneers apostrophe conquest. It's better because none of these really are owners or possessors of each other. It's better to keep to of the conquest of the tropics for civilization. And a reminder that tropics is always with the, and it's plural, even though it was singular in English. The tropic in English is only possible if you say which tropic. So I suppose you could say which tropic, or you could just say the tropics. And civilization is without the. Okay, so the tropics, civilization. And then I started to worry about word order because you have in Portuguese the verb, then the subject, then you have a little sort of extra thing, nessa proeza, and then you have the direct object, their greatest historical mission. And I needed to, at least for me, I needed to keep the Portuguese next to the verb, found or faced, and then then the direct object, the greatest historical mission. And I needed to put nessa proeza either right at the beginning before the Portugueses or right at the end. So here you can see the two possibilities in two slightly different reds to try to make it a bit clearer that there were two separate translations. And also in this sentence, I had the dilemma, shall I use historic or historical? Lots and lots of adjectives that end in IC. You don't need to add the AL at the end, like geographic. I can use geographic, or I can use geographical. But there are some in which the difference is quite big, like economic and economical. So, sorry. Economic means to do with economics, and economical means to do with saving money. So a very economical car, a small car usually. And historic and historical, they're really close, but historic is used more for, this was a landmark thing, a historic meeting, the historic meeting in 1945 at which the UN Charter was signed. That's historic because it changed things. Historical is used to talk about things that happen in history. And here you could kind of argue for both. I feel historical's better because it's the idea that the mission took place sometime in the history of the Portuguese conquests. But I did accept historic as well. And there's a table at the end of this file that talks about the differences. And you can see that quite a lot of examples show that they're really close together. Okay. In the next sentence, the word order started off sort of okay, except that, you had to know how to translate sem embargo. But at least, the word order wasn't weird until we got to the comma after obra. And you had to think of a way of translating the next bit. And then the word order kind of went back to being normal. It should be acknowledged, or it must be recognized, that they were not only the effective, but also the natural proponents of this mission. And then you can see another possible way of writing the sentence. Instead of translating portadores as a noun, you can turn this phrase into a verb: people to carry out this mission. And lots of people translated portadores as carriers. Okay, you do talk about carrying out a mission, but you can't talk about the people as carriers. I did accept bearers, however. To bear a mission, I think, is acceptable. So I quite like this darker red one, which turned it into a verb: the effective people to carry out this mission. And finally, in this paragraph, a little earlier on, we talked about the Portuguese. Just a reminder that that means Portuguese people in general, and therefore the Portuguese found their greatest historical mission. Their, referring to the plural people, not the Portuguese found his or its. It's their, it's all the Portuguese as a plural entity. And also in this file, there's a reminder about how nationalities that end in ESE behave. So if you need to talk about just one Portuguese person, you have to say a Portuguese man or a Portuguese woman or a Portuguese person. You can't say a Portuguese. All right, moving on to the second paragraph. So the word order was not quite so difficult here, but I still think it was quite difficult just to kind of get the sense of what he was saying. So I pretty much kept to the order. But I put "in truth" before the verb, because we can't really say that this exploration of the tropics was not carried out. No, we could say that was not carried out in truth by or as a methodical and rational undertaking. It would be possible. What is important is to keep the preposition by or as next to the thing that comes after it, the noun, noun phrase, methodical and rational undertaking. Okay, so don't split up the preposition and the thing that comes after it. And I liked having carried out next to the preposition as well. But that was not as important as keeping the preposition with the other thing. We'll see another example of that a bit later. So the main thing that went wrong in this paragraph was this sentence, this clause: fez-se antes com desleixo e certo abandono. Antes, I really think couldn't be translated as before here. It wasn't a time idea, it was a replacement idea. So it wasn't carried out as a methodical and rational undertaking. It wasn't constructive and energetic. It was instead of all of that, or it was rather a careless and neglectful action. So you can see that there were several different ways that I offered the possibility of translating this com desleixo e certo abandono. And neglect is a noun and a verb. Abandon is a noun and a verb as well. Okay. The other things in this paragraph were just like, well, maybe you got it right, maybe you didn't, but there were quite a lot of options for at least some of the words, you know, words like menoscabo a grandeza, I offered several possibilities there. All right, then the next paragraph, the last paragraph, starts "se o julgarmos," and I think we need to keep that it. And the it, I suppose, I mean, this isn't incredibly important, but I suppose it refers back to the Portuguese effort, what the Portuguese did, the feat, the undertaking. So if we judge it according to the moral and political criteria dominant today, or that are dominant today, we will find. So that wasn't too difficult. I think for some people, it may have been difficult to know where to put today, hoje dominantes, and really it needed to go at the end. So again, a time adverb, today, last week, usually goes right at the beginning or right at the end. But if we put it right at the beginning here, it would appear to relate to the whole sentence today if we judge it, which is grammatically fine, but the idea was dominant today. Another solution here would be to say, according to today's, with an apostrophe S. Remember, you can use an apostrophe S for today. If we judge it according to today's moral and political criteria, today's dominant moral and political criteria, that would be possible too. And in the next sentence, people mostly manage to make the sentence work in terms of word order, but most people had some trouble with leve com justiça a opinião. And here, leve really needed to be leads to. So none refers to the faults or flaws. None of these faults, however, justly lead us to reach this extravagant opinion advocated or defended by lots of people, which is that the Dutch were better colonizers. Okay, so it needed to be lead to. And I translated com justiça as justly. Some people said with justice. I accepted it, but it was a bit hard to know where to put it because it didn't really go before the main verb, leads, and it was a bit annoying after it. You'd have to put it with commas. You could say none, however, that leads, comma, with justice, comma, to the extravagant opinion. That would just about be possible. And just one other slightly controversial thing here. None can be followed by a singular noun. In this case, I did choose that, leads, but you can definitely argue for a plural noun, lead. None, however, that justly leads or lead. Contemporary English does accept none plus a plural noun if there's this idea that none of all of these lead, like when none really has a plural meaning. And actually, I think you could argue for that here. I think you could argue for both. And then there was this rather pretentious thing of número não pequeno de detratores. And we can do exactly the same in English. We can say a not insignificant, a not inconsiderable number. Or we can be much more straightforward and say a considerable number of detractors of Portuguese action. Now, you definitely should get marked wrong for the last one, a considerable number of detractors. But that's the sort of thing they might think that you hadn't been as faithful to the original because you hadn't written this rather pretentious double negative, not inconsiderable. So possibly, be prepared to lose something in fidelity. If I were defending your appeal and you had written a considerable number, I would say a not inconsiderable number is extremely pretentious in English and seems to be not faithful to this author. I'm not sure if that would be true or not, but we often can defend the choices that you make in the criterion fidelidade. We can have a go at it. Okay. So remember that Holandese is, the adjective is Dutch. We can't really have a different adjective. For the country, we can say Holland. We usually say Holland or the Netherlands. But for the adjective, you have to say Dutch with a capital D, as with all nationalities. And here, again, we had the verb levar. So a little earlier, I said you should use lead to an extravagant opinion. Here, I think I prefer taken, but you could possibly choose led us on better and more glorious paths. I think that is acceptable as well. And I just put another note here, a couple of other notes. Defender in Portuguese is used a lot. I did accept defend here in the last line of the first page, but I often use advocate. Defend is more often for when you're actually defending against an attack. He criticized my work and I defended it. And when you're just putting forward an idea, advocate might be better in English. So that often would be my first choice. And then there was one thing that caused quite a lot of trouble for people was this optaria de bom grado e confessadamente. De bom grado, quite a few people did correctly choose willingly. I think that was quite a good word to use there, but you cannot use willfully. Willful is when you are doing things in a way that is just selfish and I want to do this and I don't care what anyone else thinks. So willful is not a very good thing. It shows sort of that it's a whim or a caprice. You just do it because you want to. And willing is more like, I do want to do it, but it's a good thing and I want to help other people and I'm willing to help you. I'm willing to do something. And I'm not ashamed to do it as well. So willingly is kind of like, yeah, I'm happy about this. I'm available and happy to defend Dutch colonization. And then the other word, I gave various options: confessedly, openly, explicitly. All right. Just going down to show you what there is here. There's nationalities, and then there's rather a long list of possibilities about historical and historic. And at the end, there will be, it's not there quite yet, but there will be just a little reminder about adverbs. Okay, it's quite a lot of reminders in one file. And next week, I think Peter will be back. I think. And I think it's our last week before Christmas, but I could be wrong there. Anyway, have a very good week ahead. And I shall stop sharing my screen and see you all either next week if it is me or perhaps after Christmas. I'm slightly losing track. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.